Okay, slightly less numbers than the previous three sessions, but I think given the time, we'll kick off. So I think we've got mostly the same group, I think, than as the previous three sessions, but I'll just quickly do an overview of the sessions, what we've been doing, and what the focus is going to be today. So this is session 4 of 4, SIT industry retrospectives. The session focus this afternoon will be SIT ops, environments, defects and release management. As I said previously, in the sessions, we're looking for participants to consider positive and negative experiences. So what went well, what didn't go so well, how those items that you raise impacted you as participants individually, and how you saw that impact the program overall. And looking for constructive suggestions on how things could be done differently for future program teams, both program and industry in focus there. These sessions and the focus of them is fairly loose, so if there's anything you do want to cover that's outside of the session focus, then please feel free to raise anything that springs to mind. Please raise your hand in Teams if you want to contribute, and we'll come to you. And in terms of the ops test stage, consider the whole life cycle. So from PIT, test cases, data, test process, engagement and comms, tooling and reporting, and anything generally that you want to raise. And again, if the conversation reaches a natural conclusion, we'll wrap up early. This is obviously the last one. If there's anything else that springs to mind, please feel free to write into the testing mailbox. We'll release the recordings. We'll also summarize the themes and play that back via the appropriate industry forum, either GLIG or PSG, or potentially a one-off SIT working group, we've just been discussing internally. And then ultimately, the lessons logged from these sessions will feed into a blueprint for subsequent industry programs document that the program will produce, not only focused on testing, but all the work streams within the program. Okay, so as most of you have been on these sessions, I'm going to open it up to the floor for someone to kick it off. Sean, hi.
I'll go as no one else. Joe's not Joe's not here to normally put his hand up first. So from an ops perspective, the good side was it gave us a good view of the service now. It gave us a good view of the DIP portal to see how that was going to work once all the stuff had been put in it as we were going through SIT. So that was quite useful. It gave us a good insight of the reporting and how it was all going to hang together as DCPs that are going to be responsible for a number of clients. That was quite useful. From the other side, what didn't go so well, we've got a couple of points. I will try and keep it concise. There was limited structure due to the amount of tests that were found during testing to be descoped. Therefore, and the time it took, I'm aware because I was trying to scope one of them that the SME kept changing the mind whether tests should be descoped or not, which was delaying moving people onto other tests or test phases. After it had been confirmed in an internal call it was going to be descoped, we were then told it wasn't being descoped, and then it was eventually descoped. There was also one. This made it feel as if it was being a little chaotic in meetings because Steve was then having to figure out what tests needed to be ran when. The descoping was making a mess of his plan, so I don't know how many iterations of the plan he went through of who was doing what when, but it just seemed very chaotic. The final note I've got is, as part of the end-to-end guidance document, the original assessment did not have any of our roles in ops testing, and then all of a sudden we were, with no information or consultation. There was just a version change to that end-to-end guidance, and we weren't told that we're in ops testing until we suddenly had to catch up. So that was just one final call out from ops tests that we were all
Right.
of a
Okay.
sudden in it.
So on the last point there, the guidance was that the DITL pack, was it, that
No, that was
changed?
the
It was
overall testing document for SIT. So it had
right.
all of
Okay.
the key, it had all the phases, all the key dates, everything. The
Yeah.
version I pulled down when I was initially given the pack to assess,
Right.
we as supplier and MS were not in ops, and I fed that back higher up, and then all of a sudden there was a couple of version changes, and we were in ops
Right. Okay.
with no call or consultation.
Okay. So there was a flux in scope,
Yeah,
and obviously that took time to stabilize, and that obviously meant that there was some effort expended that could have been avoided, and that obviously is not what we wanted. But then
yeah,
also in terms of it sounds like not just the scope of the test cases, but the scope of the involvement of participants as well. Again, was something that came later than was optimal. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. But then the ServiceNow portal and the familiarization of that was all
Yeah,
positive from a
that's
user
yeah,
point of view. Yeah.
yeah, I've been able to do a couple of training sessions with the guys that have taken over from qualification. They've actually used that quite well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to call out. That was quite good.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thanks, Sean. Linda, hi.
Hi. Good thing. I think the defect reporting, like the overall control of the squads with using the ADOs, was very good. So it was easy to see what was going on. And it was really good once we lost the anonymity, we could see what was going on in other places and could get a sense of what was happening ourselves. So I thought that was really good.
Yep.
Two areas of improvement, I think. We did lose, I think, quite a lot of time by releasing during testing hours. And we asked several times whether that could be changed, and we didn't really get a response. I don't know if it's a commercial thing or it was just people were trying to make sure people weren't working to the wee small hours. But I think we lost some time, especially in those critical days when we were trying to get through a lot of tests and we were well behind. I think that might have been a decision that could have
Is
been
that
made.
an observation more broad than operations?
Yeah, I'm talking
Are
about
you saying just
you
across
had
the
in
board?
your opening slide releases, so
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Yes. Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about that. Yeah, so sorry if I
Yeah.
didn't make that clear. So I think that
No. No.
maybe
That's fine.
um, for future projects, it might be an idea to look at releasing, maximizing the amount of testing time people have got, and releasing out of hours. I thought that might have been something good. And the last point, I thought, even though I think defects were reported well when they were reported, I think there was some cases we certainly observed where an error came up with us, and we reported it, and it turned out it had been an error elsewhere. I think people should be encouraged early on to report stuff and not, try and work their way through it, because I think that would have benefited many people. And I've got no real evidence for that apart from a couple of examples that my team told me about. So I think maybe commonality of what constitutes a defect, and sharing of that information, I think maybe could have been a little bit better improved, and what concession actually meant, because I think some tests got passed early on which didn't get passed later. So maybe that's something, a commonality and a clear understanding and encouragement of reporting defects and bugs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we went through a triage process on defects, and if we identified any duplication, we could sort of capture that in the triage process. If a defect wasn't reported, and then another participant encountered it, I mean that's quite difficult to trap, I think. If that's the scenario that you're talking about. But I think obviously as a program we did want to encourage people to raise defects if they met an unexpected event. We didn't want participants to have to kind of triage for themselves. We'd rather do that centrally. The point about releases out of hours, definitely it was a topic that was explored on a number of occasions. yes, there was a commercial aspect to it. There was a need to also balance that with the fact that we were going to be running for a very long time. And I think we're talking really around central parties here. We tried to obviously limit those downtimes as much as we possibly could, and try and make sure that we were aligning releases from different central parties at the same time as much as possible. But I think you're right in saying that if it is a deployment in an in-hours scenario, it is going to have an impact on testing, and we may want to recommend that is a more serious conversation from the outset. That's built into the plan to try and make sure there's more time, and that's a recommendation we could make to a future program. Whether it's feasible or not on a future program is obviously down to that program to decide with the participants involved. But yeah, I take your point.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Hi, Joe. Melville.
Hi, Don. Thank you. So from an IMServe perspective, obviously working in cohorts E and F, I know we've raised a few points on the other calls, but a couple of other areas to raise on ops and release management. Starting on ops, I think what did go well, and echo earlier comments around the coordination and support, especially during the service management testing. I think that was good. I think we should call that out as a positive, and the stand-ups working well as well in ops. On the other side of the coin, in terms of what could have been improved, I think there was a couple of points that we kind of felt. One was around some of the test case guidance that was issued for some test cases in ops. That at times the guidance that was issued contradicted what the test case objective was all about. So again, that raised queries and confusion, I think, in terms of what we were trying to do and what the guidance, whether to follow the guidance or whether to follow the test case, because there weren't alignments between the two. So I think that was one area.
Yeah, sorry, Joe, just to add into that. Yeah, so a lot of that was down to the actual test scripts being incorrect. So that's why the guidance was given. And hopefully, yeah, that made sense. But yeah, the test scripts themselves were incorrect. So we had to put a plan in place to still try and achieve the goal. But yeah, that was the main reason for that.
Okay, and I think perhaps that could be called out front and center on the guidance and or the test cases.
Yeah,
obviously refreshed to support that guidance then, because where there's still a delta between the two, that as I say could have caused some confusion. And I think I'm thinking specifically about BR12. I know there were a number of queries raised about that area. So this is specifically an example of what I'm referring to there. And I think one of the other things we kind of felt was that in terms of the test case structure, we raised a comment on this being something that worked well in functional. I think in operations, we had all the test cases in one master view, unlike in functional, and that didn't necessarily work as well in terms of being able to track what the last run state of the test case was. Because when one test showed up as passed, it was showing as passed irrespective of which cohort, or rather it was kind of cohort agnostic in terms of the test result. So it wasn't necessarily clear that every cohort had passed it, which in most cases wasn't the case. It only takes one cohort to pass the test for it to show as passed, because there's only one instance of that test case, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if ADO was structured for for ops in the same way as functional, I think having different test case IDs for each cohort, recognizing that there would still be duplication there as there was in functional, would have been helpful in terms of tracking the progress of execution through cohort by cohort level. 3.2 was split by participant, but again,
That's
because there was still only there was still only one instance of the test case itself, you still had that overlaying problem.
Yeah. So I guess in functional and migration, there was a much greater consistency in terms of what tests needed to be run by which cohorts, and most cohorts were running the same tests, with the exception, obviously, of unmetered. Whereas in operational, obviously, there was a much greater difference between what was required from a qualification perspective and what was being run to prove the ops design. So I think the recommendation there you're saying is we should have given different IDs for different participants that were running those tests so that we could ring fence them more clearly.
Yeah. I think there's no practical reason why we couldn't have repeated what worked well in functional into the operational space from an ADO structure point of view to enable that clearer traceability of test case progress against cohort execution.
Sure.
Just one other point, and this is a broader point on the release side of things, and actually probably more related to comms around releases. I think we saw lots of duplicate comms coming out across different cohort channels with the same message. Now, I'm all for getting the same message twice rather than not at all, but I think in a lot of cases it was coming through multiple times in multiple places, and probably quite a significant overhead in the program to issue that same comms out 8 times into each cohort channel. So a suggestion that we would like to put forward is to have a single all cohort teams channel in future programs for common updates like releases, deployments, downtimes, etc. So rather than having the same message go out 8 times, you've got all cohorts, all participants, all central parties, everybody in one common channel that would allow for that kind of comms to be given a lot more efficiently.
Yeah, that's probably a good shout in terms of those common comms that need to go out for everyone. In terms of context, I think we learned from CIT pretty quickly that if you had too many participants in one channel, that could get very noisy very quickly. We moved to the cohort model and then structured the channels below the cohorts. Obviously, if you're in multiple cohorts and you would have been in at least a main cohort and a paired cohort, you may have seen duplicate messages as a consequence when it came to things like releases or let's say an unplanned outage or something like that. But yeah, I think having a common channel to keep specifically for updates that impact everyone is probably a good recommendation. Yeah.
And perhaps it's a broadcast channel rather than a communication, a bilateral communication channel to reduce that noise. I think that's it from us. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. Joe Bevan?
I am here. Sorry, Sean, for making you go first. Just a couple of bits from the Kraken side. So firstly, and I think this is reflected in the way that several of the tests were de-scoped, but we actually found the program to be quite pragmatic and receptive to feedback around test cases, particularly with the script issues that we saw, and that was appreciated. We felt that we could enter a bit of a dialogue with the program and work out the best way forward with some test cases that we had some questions over, so that was good. One thing to feedback was we felt that there could have been a little bit more coordination between SITOPS and NFT, and that showed itself in 2 ways. First, there was a point where SITOPS and NFT were attempted in a sort of concurrent way. I'm not sure if the program leads of either of those were as aware of the other thing happening at once as maybe there needed to be, because running SITOPS involved dip outages at times that NFT was being run, and it all got a little bit messy, and it meant that the whole SITOPS phase was paused for a fair bit of time, and there was delays there. So that was a bit of a problem for a couple of weeks. And then there was also a few tests in SITOPS that were very similar to what we were doing in NFT with dip outages, certificate issues, essentially measuring the same thing that we did in NFT. So I'm just wondering if there's a little bit more coordination between those 2 phases of testing that could have happened.
Okay, so two aspects there. One is obviously sharing the same environment and trying to schedule both in that environment meant that the 2 stages were tripping over each other. I think that was more at the beginning, wasn't it? I think it got better as we learned, but then also just actually looking at the scope as well and comparing it.
Right.
If they're, with those non-functional test phases, just being clear that you've got no repetition. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Any more on SITOPS? No, okay. So we've had a few comments there on release management and to a degree environments as well. Any commentary around defect management from anyone? Any observations there? Things that you thought went well, things that possibly could be done differently in future programs? Anna, hi.
Hiya. Yes, just to say that the defect calls went very well by the end of it anyway. Obviously, these things improved as they went along. And the same with release management. Both of them went well. We do have a couple of, obviously, we're all doing the good thing and then the bad thing, the good cop, bad cop bit, aren't we? Yeah, so the calls went well. The triaging, we found that a lot of defects ended up with us because MPRS is very central to everything. Initially, a lot of defects came straight to us when in fact we then looked at the design and worked out that it wasn't actually our issue, but things regularly just got sent straight to us. So we spent a lot of time investigating issues which necessarily shouldn't have been with us. The knowledge did grow as we went along, but it would have been useful for people to have had the knowledge at the beginning and perhaps training to understand how the design worked, because obviously the design is incredibly complex, and because everything was done so quickly, people didn't have a chance to understand. Nobody, I don't think anyone fully understands the full design because it is so complex. So we did end up with a lot of queries. So I do suggest that, as was said in one of the other, as I said in one of the other lessons learned, I think more time. This was such a huge program of work with such a complex design and such knowledge transfer. I think that more time should have been spent before we moved into SIT because there was that.
Yeah, I take your point there, Anna. I mean, there was several stages that were occurring when a defect was raised. So obviously, at a cohort sort of coordinator, maybe participant or cohort level, there was some discussion about a defect, and there might be some internal discussion as well on the program team to try and decide whether we're even talking about a defect or it's not necessary. Once we decide yes, a defect is required, that would be raised by the participant. There'd be an initial kind of quality check triage on that defect to make sure it had all the right information that was needed to triage it and route it. And then it would go to a triage call on a daily basis internally, and then it would be routed to the resolver group that the triage forum felt was most appropriate to look at it first. Now, obviously, the next session where everyone got together was the afternoon call, which would, as you say, was very useful. But when it comes to a program of this nature, do you think there should have been a second triage call, perhaps with the central parties, to talk about those defects that had been routed and potentially reroute them another way? Because I think we were having those discussions on certain defects, but we weren't systematically doing it for all defects that were coming on the inflow.
Possibly, as we know, there were a lot of meetings, and I think even more meetings would have slowed everything down.
I think you made a key point though. I mean, we obviously had a good set of resources on the triage team, but when it came to specific knowledge of the central systems, we were then dependent on your expertise within the central party teams. And I wonder in future programs whether we'd want to integrate the central party teams into the triage process a little bit more. Possibly,
yes. I think if we'd have realised the amount of knowledge that we would have had to help with, we would have well, obviously we can't resource up at the last minute because it is such a huge, we've been on this program 4 years or whatever it is now, so we have the knowledge now, but you can't just get people in to help out. So I think to understand, to be prepared beforehand. Now there was obviously the knowledge. There's several knowledge things on the collaboration base. Now they're not all in the same area, and I think that there's the knowledge, I can't remember what it's called, what's the knowledge base. Unfortunately, it's not very easy to search. So I think that having something that's easier to search for everybody to look up, and also something, for example, market segment, how a change of market segment works is hidden away in a couple of different documents. It's not, there's just not one, there wasn't, I haven't looked recently, there wasn't just one document that explained how to do change of market segment. So there, I think that perhaps there should be, you know, we all have the DES 138 and but there's so much other design, other information around it that I think there needs to be more knowledge out there. My concern is that once we do go live, obviously from SIT point of view, we've all been working on it. So we, even now, even, you know, at the end of regression, we were still getting some of the same errors coming through. And my concern is that the people who've only used the DIP, you know, not actually used the central systems, are going to severely cause, there's going to be a lot of toing and froing with why doesn't this work? And I think that when we go live, it's not going to be a smooth process at all. I really think it is. There is going to be a lot of queries out there. We obviously have knowledge validation rules that are being issued, and but I think that there needs to be a lot more knowledge out there for people to be able to read up on before panicking and contacting everybody when everybody is incredibly busy as it is. I think that the DNOs will have problems.
It's an interesting point, I think. So I think, you know, having a knowledge base there is a good thing. I think, you know, one of your suggestions there for improvement was how that could be searchable, but I'm thinking sort of earlier on in the life cycle. So obviously with such a huge complex architecture that we were talking about, and this is just with the central parties and the SIT participants, but if you consider the whole industry, but across all the market roles, how could we have KT from all the key systems involved ahead of the testing starting? Because obviously, to a degree, you're always going to have test teams that are mobilizing, that are getting to grips with what the solution is, and you know they're just getting to grips with the design, and they don't know all the other systems involved. But how we could kind of draw that out and potentially have, at least before testing begins, and you can record these things, and just having key SMEs from each key system involved actually giving some element of KT to the testing team.
Yes.
Now, obviously, you've got to maintain that somehow, because with a program this long, we've obviously had in all teams a certain turnover of resources, right? So you'll have some people who've been around since the outset, but then other people joining later. But there needs to be then some kind of knowledge base in place, doesn't there, to maintain that ability for those teams and those resources to self-serve to a degree.
Yes.
But there's got to be that investment up front, that there is a sufficient amount of knowledge available and produced and disseminated to allow people to do that.
Before Paul, I can see Paul is itching to say something. But before Paul says it, yes, it has improved over the course of SIT. Obviously, we got asked a lot less questions and there was a lot more knowledge there. So yes, it has improved, and it is very difficult to have that knowledge up front. It's just very, it's you know, it's stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't we? Really, it is very difficult. And how do you pass that lesson on? I
don't think you'll ever fully solve that problem, but there are. I think if we could emphasize a sort of element of KT being beneficial, rather than letting that just be an organic process of test teams learning as they go, and everyone involved really in terms of the testing support functions as well. If we could invest more up front, not just as a program team, but as all the key participants within the process as well, drawing everyone together. Because I think, obviously something that I saw that was very positive on this was the level of collaboration amongst teams and constructive collaboration, and that's across the board. I think fostering that a little bit earlier in the process, I think, may have alleviated this to some degree.
Yes. And I think also the design changed, as we know, how many IRs did we have? as the design changed, perhaps we shouldn't have gone into SIT so soon while things were still being developed, while we didn't have the, while still things were still being up in the air. And I know that we need to develop as we go, but I think there's a point, isn't there, where we shouldn't, perhaps we should have waited a little until we were a little more stable and a little more understanding to move into SIT. But yes, the collaboration was very good, and the collaboration I think carried it through very well. The fact that everybody was approachable and easy to get hold of most of the time, you know, obviously with and everybody you know, wanted this to happen. So teams were very engaged, and I think that helped.
Yeah. Okay, some good points there. Richard, Sean, I'm aware that you're in the queue there, but Paul, did you specifically want to talk on this topic?
It was. Thank you. It was just really to echo Anna's point, really. I mean, yeah. I mean, initially, I think, yeah, within our team, certainly, we didn't know the details within MPRS. We treated it as a black box. So it was a learning experience for us as well. And I think the collaboration was very good. I mean, we had lots of calls with Maddie, with Dan, etc., trying to work out exactly what the validation rules are within MPRS. And I mean, just picking up on your point that you raised, and I think it's a very valid one about those parties that weren't part of SIT will be going into this afresh. I do echo it is going to be a challenge, I think, because the design as it currently stands is now frozen and everything is in code. So they are theoretically building off of regs code now. The design documents won't be being updated anymore, and I do think that is going to be a challenge. And but I do
Paul, does that speak to the advantage of being a SIT participant, do you think?
I think it does, absolutely.
Yeah, so for those participants out there that do want to be an early adopter in the process, there's definitely a benefit for them. Yeah.
Well, whilst everything's being captured in code, there's certain artifacts like DES 138 and other documents I think will be kept as key documents, key reference documents. I mean, that's why we're not taking it down off of the website, off the collaboration base, and they will be there for historic purposes. But those new parties will be coming in, and the triage of those calls. We are going to be, we're not disappearing. It is handing over to obviously to Alexon and ServiceNow, etc. But during early life support, we are going to be around in the background, but they will be front and center. But there are going to be challenges, and I absolutely echo Anna's concerns on that one. And but I think from a collaboration point of view, it definitely was a good piece of work. There was a lot, and certainly towards the end, we learned a hell of a lot. And as you said, it was quite a complex design, and Dom's explanation about the different triage levels. I mean, you got
so we were at the end of it.
You got a lot. You got the front of a lot of it. But I mean, the whole design sort of put MPRS in the center of the universe, and so everything sort of flows in and out of that to a large degree. And so have we done things differently? Yeah, we could have done things differently, I think, but I think it did demonstrate how well we can work together, and I do hope that persists going forward, because there are going to be new challenges when we go live for sure. And but no, that's all. It was just really to acknowledge what Anna was saying, really, and the fact that we learned a lot. And it was MPRS was a black box to us, and whilst we had all the design documents, we didn't have the design documents for MPRS and how it worked internally. I think that would have helped, and to understand how that worked better. Thank you. Sorry, Richard. Sorry, Sean.
No, and I just want to say, if you did take the documents off collaboration base before the end of at any point, I think all hell would break loose.
No, we're not. They're not.
we
They're
would
not
be
going. They're not going anywhere.
Good.
They're going to
Good.
have a
We'd
bit
be
of a. They're going to have a health warning over them to say they're not being maintained, but they won't be disappearing.
Good.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Hannah. Richard, thanks for waiting patiently there.
That's right. I mean, this wasn't the bit I was going to start with, but following that theme and the benefit of being a SIT participant, and again, the queries we might see from those who haven't come through SIT once they get on board after qualification, I think from my side, we're already starting to hear things in like that MHHS expert group that's been set up where there's queries coming in about, and you think, well, it was designed that way in a reason. And it's the people who obviously haven't been engaged in those conversations. That's just another thing that's going to be interesting to follow with the BAU change process moving forward, of why things are the way they are. And obviously there was years of design sessions. The general point I was putting my hand up to make anyway was just the positives around the defect process. I found particularly the 230 defect calls, the structure of them, quick, simple, easy, really well organized and consistent with the way that was always run. So that was a real positive, and the benefit of having a team. We had a separate Teams channel with the defects team as well, which was also really useful to engage with that team both ways when needed. I just thought it was a real good way of managing that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. Sean?
Yeah, the comments are not coming from me; they're coming from other colleagues that you're aware of, Dom. So, for the defects, so yeah, to reiterate Richard's point, the calls did work. The only call out that is come from a colleague on those calls is could an agenda be issued beforehand? Because there were a couple of occasions where we were expecting responses about defects and they were just missed. That we were expecting responses for because it had been mentioned the day before that we'll get something today, and the meeting just sailed through and didn't respond. So
it was led by the defects that were open rather than the actions that were coming out of the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes there weren't any timescales or urgency on some of the defects, but I know that was dictated by releases and how quickly people could triage internally and get releases in.
I think that one of the obviously we drove to get ETAs as much as we could on fixes, release cycles for different participants, and I think we're mainly talking about central parties here, aren't we? Were dictated to a degree by a workflow that they were going through on a weekly basis. So going through development, test, release into different environments, and then into the SIT environment. And it was easier for those participants to stick to that. Now, obviously, we had exceptions, didn't we, where we would put in something a bit more urgent sooner, maybe in a hot fit scenario, that kind of thing. But the SLAs that we were working to were really a guideline rather than anything that we could enforce. And it's an interesting one. I think if you could enforce them a bit more, then it would have helped. And I think along with potentially out of hours releasing, if that was possible, I think those things would have helped. And I think we all acknowledge that throughout the journey, and I think everyone worked with that as best they could. But obviously we were always conscious of the fact that every time there's downtime or there's defect that we're waiting for, then obviously that's throughput in testing that's being impacted, and so overall you're getting less bang for your buck, right? So I think that's acknowledged, and it's a recommendation if it can be achieved, because we know that it wasn't something we could really get in place on this one. And I don't know whether there's a regulatory angle that could be that sort of lever could be pulled, but I think if there's something that could be done on that, it would definitely help and potentially shrink the timescales to a degree.
My next point is what went well as we advanced. So when there were defects across found, as the knowledge improved, there was consultation with other cohorts. So it didn't go well at the beginning. This was one of the reasons it was raised to me, is that if a defect was found, the tests were blocked in other cohorts. But there were occasions where we had already gone past those steps and the test was blocked and we'd have to rebuild with ADO, blah, blah, blah. But that did improve. So it would be a recommendation that that consultation where defects are found occurs with cohorts before the tests are nullified.
So we definitely felt this on the program. And it was very much helped by when we removed the anonymity and we went into a single program, because we were operating with multiple ADO projects for each cohort and paired cohort. Sometimes it was difficult for the program itself to see issues across the board, and obviously as everyone was getting to grips with what they were doing, the program was in that process as well. But we definitely saw that improve greatly as we moved into a single ADO project. And I think that would be a key recommendation for me is, don't maintain anonymity, because there will be consequences for that. And if you can centralize it and give everyone the most transparency across the piece in terms of what everyone's doing, then you're less likely to have an impact.
Yeah. And then the final one from me on the defects is it was called out about the issue between the the delivery and the swagger mismatch at the beginning. It would just be a recommendation that very, very early doors, it's called out what is the master delivery and design document. So we didn't have two working streams of people working against either the delivery, which was the schema, or the swagger. That caused a lot of headaches.
Okay. Obviously, that was an issue earlier on, wasn't it?
Yeah. It still bit us quite hard.
Yeah. So we may have had more traction earlier on in the testing process without that issue. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. Anna?
Yes, I agree with Sean about that. Yeah, that did cause quite a bit of an issue. But also one other thing is that there was at times defects were closed. I think that the defects were closed without the raiser's knowledge. So there were times when we kind of turned around and went, "Oh, hang on a minute, that one's been closed," without realizing it. So I think there's certain processes need to, perhaps out of courtesy, people who raise the defect should be checked with. Obviously, it's
Yeah, that shouldn't. I think that was a
shouldn't happen.
deviation of process, because it wasn't the intent. It was always that the raiser was the one that confirmed it could be closed. So it may have been that we deviated from process in some instances, and that shouldn't have been the case.
I think in early doors there was a bit of confusion about who should close defects down, and I think certain participants went in and closed it, trying to be helpful. But I think over a period of time, then we tried to close that door and make sure that we'd put a note saying, we recommend this to be closed. Does the raiser agree? So I think that did improve over time, but there was definitely that kind of issue early doors.
Yes, and I admit, Salman, I was one of those. I closed one. I remember you told me off. But yes, no, I agree. As long as I'm quite happy not to close them, as long as I'm asked if they can be closed, if I've raised it, because it's there's certain things you kind of think, well, actually that might not be a problem, but what about this? And it follows on. But with the program this size, it's very difficult to be swept away with other things, the next thing that's coming along, and we all lose track, don't we?
Yeah, and we want to move things forward, right? And it was an overhead for the defects team to close things down, so it was welcome. But I think, like you say, the size of the program and maintaining that control over the quality of the defects, especially when it's going to feed into reporting, etc., we just needed to make sure that was tight.
And I think that with the amount of defects that you dealt with, I think you all did very well. I think I think the defect management and the release management was fantastic. The way it was dealt with, because there were so many defects, and once the cohorts could all see each other's defects, and there weren't child records, and there wasn't confusion, and we had to kind of, because being a central party, we had to look at all the different areas to work out all the different defects, rather than we couldn't just look in one area. That was a big problem. So trying to And also, you know, ADO isn't perfect. And it's just trying to get all that information. It's a learning curve.
Yeah.
So, I mean, probably possibly the best product to use, but still not an easy one.
Thanks, Anna. Sean?
I think Anna's just reminded me of one link to that. I think part of the problem that we saw with those emails, Anna, is they were going to the market half-hourly email that had been created to get into the collaboration base that we had zero access to. So as an improvement, Carol Ann created a Teams channel for ESG where they would go, right, the email is going to the MHHS channel, but they would drop a message in that Teams channel going, we recommend this defect can be closed. Tag the person, can someone go have a look at it? And because we were always in Teams, we'd get that tag. But that was also a headache early doors because we had no idea the emails had gone to non-ESG emails.
Yeah,
and we
and
were
that
the
was
same with
consequence of the
meetings.
setup.
Sorry, we were the same with meetings as well, so that we missed meetings, triage meetings, because it wasn't the St Clement's email address, rather it was the MHHS. So that needs to, somehow. That's a difficult one, isn't it?
The technical constraint there was we needed to give each user a license, and therefore we had to create an account, but we didn't create email accounts for you, but it wasn't always known by everyone that those email accounts weren't active. I think, like you say, I think there are other channels that are better suited anyway, and a Teams channel worked out as a better solution to get that information out. That's one we learned as we were going. Yeah. Okay. I don't see any more hands up, but we'll just pause briefly if there's anything else anyone wants to raise. No. Okay. As a last sort of point from myself, I think this was a very complex setup, not just a complex design, but a very complex setup from a testing perspective, with a very large number of teams involved, and a lot of information flying around, a lot of coordination required and collaboration required. And you know, there's quite a lot of people that were involved in the testing that haven't been on these calls as well. Maybe they've rolled off, maybe they're working on something more urgent in terms of go live. But I'd just like to say one thing I've learned from this is, you know, there's a lot of pressures on everyone, but as a group of testing professionals involved and all of the support teams, you know, design teams, defect management, release management, across all of the participants that were involved, all working together, I think the collaboration, the level of collaboration and the constructive and a positive communication between teams and members of those teams on a day in, day out basis was a massive benefit on this program. And I think, you know, as a key recommendation, if that can be fostered in subsequent programs, you know, that's key to success, I think. And I just want to thank everyone for that throughout this journey. It's been very tough on everyone, but it's also been a great success and a great effort by everyone. So thank you very much. All right, I think we can close off there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Just